Welcome on Easy Learning. Now I am going to read a new chapter. The chapter name is Ideas That Have Helped Mankind, written by Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Arthur William Russell, 1872 to 1970, a British philosopher, historian, mathematician, advocate for social reform, pacifist and a prominent rationalist of the 20th century, was a prolific writer. He was also a commentator on a large variety of topics. His comments on sex, marriage, politics, religion, science, psychology, philosophy, socialism, education, Christ, Marx, Buddha, and a host of other topics are pithy and full of candor. In 1950, Russell was awarded Nobel Prize in Literature in recognition of his varied and significant writings, in which he champions humanitarian ideals and freedom of thought. As one of the world's best-known intellectuals, Russell's voice carried great moral authority. He was original and provocative in his attitude and clear and forceful in his style. His writings emphasize reason, intelligence, human happiness, peace, and liberty. His major works include a history of Western philosophy, human knowledge, its scope and limits, authority and the individual, has many fact and fiction, my philosophical development, conquest of happiness, marriage and morals, roads to freedom, in praise of idleness, why I am not a Christian. Ideas that have helped mankind. Before we can discuss this subject, we must form some conception as to the kind of effect that we consider a help to mankind. Are mankind helped when they become more numerous, or when they become less like animals, or when they become happier, or when they learn to enjoy great diversity of experiences, or when they come to know more, or when they become more friendly to one another? I think all these things come into our conception of what helps mankind, and I will say a preliminary word about them. The most indubitable respect in which ideas have helped mankind is numbers. There must have been a time when Homo sapiens was a very rare species, subsisting precariously in jungles and caves, terrified of wild beasts, having difficulty in securing nourishment. At this period, the biological advantage of his greater intelligence, which was cumulative because it could be handed on from generation to generation, had scarcely begun to outweigh the disadvantages of his long infancy, his lessened agility as compared with monkeys, and his lack of hirsute protection against cold. In those days, the number of men must certainly have been very small. The main use to which, throughout the ages, men have put their technical skill has been to increase the total population. I do not mean that this was the intention, but that it was in fact the effect. If this is something to rejoice in, then we have occasion to rejoice. We have also become, in certain respects, progressively less like animals. I can think in particular of two respects. First, that acquired as opposed to congenital skills play a continually increasing part in human life, and secondly, that assuming more and more dominates impulse. In these respects, we have certainly become progressively less like animals. As to happiness, I am not sure. Birds, it is true, die of hunger in large numbers during the winter, if they are not birds of passage, but during the summer day they do not foresee this catastrophe, or remember how nearly it befell them in the previous winter. With human beings, the matter is otherwise. I doubt whether the percentage of birds that will have died of hunger during the present winter, 1946 to 47, is as great as the percentage of human beings that will have died from this cause in India and Central Europe during the same period. But every human death by starvation is preceded by a long period of anxiety and surrounded by the corresponding anxiety of neighbors. We suffer not only the evils that actually befall us, but all those that our intelligence tells us we have reason to fear. The curving of impulses to which we are led by forethought averts physical disaster at the cost of worry and general lack of joy. I do not think that the learned men of my acquaintance, even when they enjoy a secure income, are as happy as the mice that eat the crumbs from their tables, while the erudite gentleman snooze. In this respect, therefore, I am not convinced that there has been any progress at all. As to diversity of enjoyments, however, the matter is otherwise. I remember reading an account of some lions who were taken to a movie showing the successful depredations of lions in a wild state, but none of them got any pleasure from the spectacle. Not only music and poetry and science, but football and baseball and alcohol afford no pleasure to animals. Our intelligence has therefore certainly enabled us to get a much greater variety of enjoyment than is open to animals. But we have purchased this advantage at the expense of a much greater liability to boredom. But I shall be told that it is neither numbers nor multiplicity of pleasures that make the glory of man. It is his intellectual and moral qualities. It is obvious that we know more than animals do, and it is common to consider this one of our advantages. Whether it is in fact an advantage may be doubted, but at any rate it is something that distinguishes us from the brutes. Has civilization taught us to be more friendly towards one another? The answer is easy. Robins, the English, not the American species, peck an elderly robin to death. Whereas men, the English, not the American species, give an elderly man an old age pension. Within the herd, we are more friendly to each other than are many species of animals. But in our attitude towards those outside the herd, in spite of all that has been done by moralists and religious teachers, our emotions are as ferocious as those of any animal, and our intelligence enables us to give them a scope which is denied to even the most savage beast. It may be hoped, though not very confidently, that the more humane attitude will in time come to prevail, but so far the omens are not very propitious. All these different elements must be borne in mind in considering what ideas have done most to help mankind. The ideas with which we shall be concerned may be broadly divided into two kinds: those that contribute to knowledge and technique, and those that are concerned with morals and politics. It will treat first those that have to do with knowledge and technique. The most important difficult steps were taken before the dawn of history. At what stage language began is not known, but we may be pretty certain that it began very gradually. Without it, it would have been very difficult to hand on from generation to generation the inventions and discoveries that were gradually made. Another great step which may have come either before or after the beginning of language was the utilization of fire. I suppose that at first fire was chiefly used to keep away wild beasts while our ancestors slept, but the warmth must have been found agreeable. Presumably, on some occasion a child got scolded for throwing the meat into the fire, but when it was taken out, it was found to be much better, and so the long history of cookery began. The taming of domestic animals, especially the cow and the sheep, must have made life much pleasanter and more secure. Some anthropologists have an attractive theory that the utility of domestic animals was not foreseen, but the people attempted to tame whatever animal their religion taught them to worship. The tribes that worshipped lions and crocodiles died out, while those to whom the cow or the sheep was a sacred animal prospered. I like this story, and in the entire absence of evidence for or against it, I feel a liberty to play with it. Even more important than the domestication of animals was the invention of agriculture, which, however, introduced bloodthirsty practices into religion that lasted for many centuries. Fertility rites tended to involve human sacrifice and cannibalism. Moloch, would not help the corn to grow unless he was allowed to feast on the blood of children. A similar opinion was adopted by the evangelicals of Manchester in the early days of industrialism, when they kept 6-year-old children working 12 to 14 hours a day in conditions that caused most of them to die. It has now been discovered that grain will grow and cotton goods can be manufactured without being watered by the blood of infants. In the case of grain, the discovery took thousands of years. In the case of the cotton goods, hardly a century. So perhaps there is some evidence of progress in the world. The last of the great prehistoric inventions was the art of writing, which was indeed a prerequisite of history. Writing like a speech developed gradually, and in the form of pictures designed to convey a message. It was probably as old as a speech, but from picture to syllable writing and thence to the alphabet was a very slow evolution. In China, the last step was never taken.